seeing we are 12:01. We've given people a bit of time to join. Well, welcome everybody. I'm sure we'll still have people joining us. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Wendy Venter toku ingoa. I'm the Chief Executive of the XRB, and it's a real pleasure to have our esteemed panel here today. Delighted to have Greg, Channa and Darby join us to talk about sustainability, assurance, ethics and independence. So a topic that has consumed quite a lot of thinking internationally and locally over the last little while. So we are very, as you say, I will introduce the panelists, but just in terms of as we get started and as people continue to join us, the general format for this hour that we have with you is I'll just do some brief introductions to the panel and just what we're here to talk about, then really just spend a bulk of our time with our panel, getting their thoughts and perspectives, and then we are going to try and make sure we carve out some time at the end of the webinar just to, if any questions that you might have. We are using the Q&A chat, and I have, we've got the team on board who are monitoring that. So please, as we go through, don't wait till the end. Just start feeding your questions, and if we don't quite have time to get to them all from the webinar, we'll certainly come back to you. But yeah, look. So first, some introductions. I will start with the person I can see on my top left next to me, Greg Sherlin. Greg is member of the IAASB, the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board. He joined that board in 2023. The XRB so we're very delighted to sort of nominate him and sort of have a New Zealand member on there. And Greg is a very long and distinguished career in the public and private sectors in New Zealand, and I've personally had the delight of being a colleague of him at the Auditor General's office. He has served on standard setting boards internationally, and including 5 years on the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. So welcome, Greg. I'll then turn to Channa Wijesinghe. Channa is the Deputy Chair of the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, so IESPA as we call it. He became a member in January 2022, and he is currently the Deputy Chair. Channa is also the Chief Executive of Australia's Accounting Professional and Ethical Standards Board. And I should say, as Channa has also been chairing IESPA's Firm Culture and Governance Working Group. Channa's previously worked in public practice with EY and Deloitte, and in financial reporting roles in energy companies. I was interested to read that, Channa. I hadn't quite appreciated it. And then last but not the least, Darby, welcome. Great to have you here. Darby is the audit partner at KPMG New Zealand, a very experienced audit professional, and we were very happy to appoint the XRB board, very happy to recently appoint her to our Auditing and Assurance Standards Board. Darby is on she's held key leadership positions, head of audit quality, audit risk partner, ethics and independence partner, so well placed to give us her perspectives on our topic for today. And Darby is also a member of the KPMG New Zealand board. So thank you, panel, for joining us. I might just also briefly add, although their cameras are off, they assure me they will join with their real faces if need be. We have two of Misha Peters, who is the Director of Auditing and Assurance, on the call, on the webinar, and also Karen Tipper, who is our Technical Director looking after this area. So I think that's probably just the introductions. Before I sort of throw the first question at I think I'll give it to you, Greg. So it's a little warning there before I get started. But just a little bit of quick background. I mean, probably many of you on the call already have this background and are interested in this. but it's always useful to start with a bit of context as to what we are doing here. The XRB is currently consulting on alignment with 3 international standards that have been recently issued. The consultation has been up and underway for a little while. The consultation closes on the 10th of October. So the team and we continuing to sort of do our sort of outreach and generate awareness of what we're sort of proposing that we are doing here. And this webinar is part of that process. The 3 standards are the international standards on sustainability assurance, or as we call it, ISO 5000. The International Ethics Standards for Sustainability Assurance, or IESA. It's a bit of a tongue twister for me, that one, but I'm sure it's not for China. And then the revisions to the code addressing the use of the work of an external expert. And the XRB is proposing in our consultation to make these standards available for use with relevant New Zealand amendments to make sure that New Zealand practitioners remain aligned with international standards. So we are proposing that we will add it as an option in our temporary domestic standard for the assurance of GHG emissions, and also to enable it for being used for voluntary assurance of wider climate statements and other sustainability information. I'm sure we'll explore some of these topics later. You might have questions which we can deal with later, but I just wanted to sort of paint a little bit of that picture before we get started. So Greg, over to you. As a member of the IAASB, what do you think are the key things this audience should be aware of when it comes to ISO 5000? And I might just, the other sort of secondary question is really, what is the IAASB seeing in terms of adoption of this standard?
Thanks, Wendy, and kia ora tātou. Hi, everyone. I think to answer your first question, I think I'd just like to start with a bit of context, Wendy, because for me, it all starts with reporting, actually, because no reporting equals no assurance needed. So I think it's important just to talk a little bit about reporting, because 5000 really sits in a standard setting ecosystem, both at an international level, but also at jurisdiction level. So within that ecosystem of standard setting, there's sustainability reporting framework. So that's what preparers have to do. Sustainability assurance standards, obviously like 5000, and then the ethical requirements. And it's that combination of those 3 things that actually we'll be covering off today. I think users are looking for information about sustainability matters that complement financial information, that we've long held dear as accountants. And that sustainability information can be narrow or broad, and you've touched on it already, really, but the sort of 3 circles, starting with the GHG stuff, the climate related, and then a broader sustainability suite of information. So that scope as to what entities have to report can be quite varied. So it's quite important what the framework requires. And I think while the long-term trend is for more reporting of information that's broader than financial, I think in recent years, it's fair to say there's been a bit of pushback. There's some geopolitics forces at play. And I think there's sort of a pressure to reduce regulation, sort of generally. I think we see it here, but it's an international trend. So whilst the long-term trend, I think, is for more information, I think there's been a bit of pushback more recently about the sort of the breadth and depth of some of the information that needs to be reported. In the end, I think users of sustainability reports should have the same confidence in that information as is in the financial information. Obviously, that's a wee way off. It's very early days, but just painting a little bit of picture about reporting there, Wendy. And I think it's fair to say, therefore, that the reporting, in that context, the reporting requirements are evolving. We're seeing it internationally, and it's happening at multiple levels as well. So at the international level, we've got a number of standard setting bodies, the ISSB tied up with IFRS Foundation, the GRI, which has been around for a long time, IPSASBs even now in that space, At regional level, you've got the likes of the CSRD directive for European Union. You've got a European standard setting body, and then at jurisdictional level, like what's happened in New Zealand, each jurisdiction is determining, what needs to be reported, so that it's multi-layered. There's lots of players. It's definitely evolving. But I think within that evolution, global baselines are emerging in those three circles that I painted at the start. And I think ISSB with its S1 and S2 standards, IAASB, which is the board I'm on with 5,000, and then IESBA, which is China's board, with the changes to the code. So I think that's the sort of global baselines that are emerging. Turning then to the global baseline standard, it's 5,000. So the one you've asked me to talk about. I think that's clearly designed to provide assurance over general purpose reporting of sustainability information. And as we know, trust and confidence is much stronger when users know that the information is credible, when it's had independent assurance. So that's the sort of thinking behind it, like any assurance standard, providing trust and confidence. In terms of the standard itself, it applies to any suitable reporting framework, so it's framework neutral. It's underpinned by ethics and quality standards, so the two key pillars that you would expect, excuse me, to support any assurance engagement. Covers both limited and reasonable assurance. I think that recognises the maturity of the reporting. Where really limited assurance even is a bit of a stretch at times. But long term, I think reasonable assurance has to be the target for this information if it's going to sit sort of in an equal setting with financial information. It's available to all assurance practitioners, so it's not just for accountants. It encompasses assurance on any sustainable information. So IAASB's decided don't need ISAE 3410 anymore on greenhouse gas emissions, because 5,000 can do the job on all the information that's reported, whatever the framework requires. And the other key thing, it's designed to cover a broader reporting boundaries than we would typically see in the financial side. So it's the group components we're normally used to in financial reporting, but it's also got the value chain components, which is a complication in the sustainability reporting space. But I think 5,000, suitably caters for that. So I think it ticks a lot of boxes as far as what it covers. It's an end-to-end type standard, and it's certainly a big, thick beast. There's a lot in there. It's a lot of pages, a lot of requirements and application material, but it covers, from acceptance, continuance, right through planning, risk assessment, responding to those risks, and then concluding and reporting. So it's the whole cycle of an assurance engagement, as you would expect. Underpinned, of course, by those two key pillars of ethics and quality management. Your second question was about adoption, 5,000. It's early days. The effective date is for periods beginning 15 December 2026. So it's, we wouldn't expect too much adoption yet, but early application is both permitted and I think encouraged. So and some countries like Australia have adopted it. Others are seriously considering it. I think there's 4 or 5 countries have adopted, and I think there's quite a number who are in the process of looking at it. So I think watch this space as far as adoption goes. I just thought, Wendy, it's a good opportunity just to reflect on, at the IAASB meeting in New York a couple of weeks ago, we got an update from IFAC on, they do a state of play research piece. They've got data from 2019 up to 2023. So it's, it's not exactly right up to date, but it's useful. And it's about both the reporting and assurance over sustainability information. They've looked at 1,900 companies worldwide in 42 jurisdictions. So it's a pretty comprehensive piece of research, and it's that longitudinal period of 5 years. Obviously, they'll keep updating this. So it's too early to get a read on 5,000 adoption through that tool, because 5,000 was still being built when, 2023. But just some key findings I thought you might find of interest. 98% of companies out of these 1,900 companies, 98% provided some sustainability disclosures. So pretty much every company is reporting something in this sustainability space, probably generally greenhouse gas emission type data. The trend is for companies to combine their reporting. So over that 5-year period, IFAC's seeing more joining up of financial information and sustainability information. I think that's quite key, actually, because I think ultimately that's going to impact who does the assurance. But yeah, it's an interesting trend at the moment. Overall, audit firms are actually providing the majority of the assurance. But interestingly, in 15 of the 42 countries, so about a third of the countries, over half of the assurance is provided by non-accountants. So even though overall audit firms are sort of dominating the space, in certain countries, certain jurisdictions, non-accountants are doing, you know, the majority of the work. So it's quite a mixed bag there. 3/4 of companies obtained assurance over greenhouse gas emission disclosures, and most assurance provided is actually in the greenhouse gas sort of area. So there's some interesting trends there, I think, just to reflect on. Clearly, the international landscape's changing, still evolving, but I think, as I said, global baselines are emerging, and including 5,000. So I think 5,000 is clearly there as a credible assurance alternative. And yeah, happy to come back a little bit later, but I think I'll just leave it there at this stage, Wendy, and ngā mihi. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very rich territory you've covered there, Greg. So thank you, and it's great to always go let's start with what the information is required to be reported, and yeah, definitely the sort of the evolving nature of what we're seeing in sustainability or climate reporting is very much front and center for the XRB as it is for other jurisdictional standard setters and the international standard setter. So it is something that is at the heart of why we're here today. You know, we had to we did a temporary standard, and we knew that the international standards were being developed, and now they are. The proposal is to add them to the list. But Tiana, could I turn to you now and get your perspectives, and maybe if you could give us a brief overview of the kind of the international and the strategic context for the work of IESA in developing IESPA and developing the IESA, and also the revisions to the code for the use of an external expert. So just key things you think this audience would find really helpful to sort of really, as we unpack these international standards.
Thanks, Wendy, and good afternoon, everyone. The good thing is that since Greg has set up all the overall framework, it makes life a bit easier. I agree with Greg that, you know, the first line of defense is the preparers. So it's important that there's a lot more focus on assurance providers, but we also need to focus on the preparers and getting them ready for this new reporting framework. So currently it's estimated that over $30 trillion is invested in sustainability related assets, and it is expected to grow to over $40 trillion in the next decade. So there is a growing demand, and as Greg pointed out, there has been some pushback recently, but there are some wealth funds such as the Norwegian Investment Bank, which has sort of made it very clear that they are focused on the Paris Accord and getting to net zero in 2050, and they expect their investee companies to be on a similar trajectory. So Greg covered that there are various reporting standards, and then such as the ESRS in EU and the IFRS S1 and S2, and then countries such as Australia and New Zealand, there is a move towards mandatory reporting. So another aspect is that the sustainability area reporting is also characterized by immature systems and processes. So this also poses significant and unique ethical risk, including the danger of greenwashing. So there is a pressing public interest consideration in ensuring that the sustainability information is trustworthy, comparable, and therefore subject to assurance. This also was evidenced by statements from IOSCO, the global regulators, and the Financial Stability Board. They issued statements in 2022 for the work of ISBA and the IAASB in developing an interoperable, high-quality suite of assurance and ethics standards. So like what Greg pointed out, that in some countries there are non-accountants also involved in it. From IOSCO's perspective, they wanted one high-quality set rather than multiple sets of standards operating, and they were comfortable with ISBA and IAASB developing these assurance and ethics standards. And after ISBA and IAASB finalized its standards, IOSCO also issued statements endorsing these standards and encouraging member nations to adopt it in their respective jurisdictions. So the ethics standards underpin trustworthy sustainability reporting and assurance. And I think independent assurance is a fundamental aspect of credible sustainability disclosures. While the sustainability reporting and assurance standards might be technically very strong, such standards are applied in real life situations by people who might be subject to bias, conflicts of interest, or pressure, which represent the added value of ISBA's ethics standards in this context. So there are about 4 key characteristics of ISBA's ISR. The first one is that we wanted to make it for the engagements that come within the scope of Part 5, for it to be equivalent to the same high standards of ethical behavior as for financial statement audits. So the assurance engagements only get caught if it's prepared in accordance with a general purpose framework like ISSB's S1 and S2, and it's also used for decision-making purposes by investors, or it's required by law or regulation. The second characteristic is it's professionally agnostic, and this also goes back to what Greg spoke about and IOSCO's request, so that it can be applied by even countries where accountants might not dominate. For example, in Korea, there's a lot more non-accountants involved in this than accountants, but they wanted the same ethics and the assurance standards to apply. It's also framework neutral, so it doesn't matter if you're using the ISSB or the GRI, what framework for reporting, or even for assurance, whether it's the IAASB framework or the ISO framework. It's also standalone, so it's a new Part 5 of the ISBA code, and this approach makes it easier for those who are unfamiliar with the code to locate all the provisions applicable to sustainability assurance engagements in one place. Then the other standards, Wendy, that you refer to, the experts standards. So in parallel with this development, over the past couple of years, during some of the other ISBA projects, such as the one on group audits and technology, ISBA has received questions from stakeholders, including the Public Interest Oversight Board, which oversees ISBA and IAASB, about to what extent assurance providers rely on the work of external experts. And this is particularly in the case of audits where there's high public interest in the credibility of such engagements. So in response to this, ISB also launched the Experts Project. And particularly another consideration was that there's a lot more other experts involved in the sustainability side, but it is also applicable to financial statement audit. So this is not only for sustainability. The project's key public interest objective was to establish a consistent global ethical baseline for professional accountants as well as sustainability assurance practitioners when they're using the work of external experts. So accordingly, the project focused on clarifying and strengthening the ISBA code, particularly with respect to one, considerations relating to the necessary ethical attributes of external experts. And this is in particular their competence, capabilities, and objectivity, or as we call it, CCO. And secondly, the ethical behavior expected of professional accountants and sustainability assurance practitioners when using the work of external experts. So these are some of the background issues we considered while developing ISBA's ethics and independence standards.
Wendy, you're on mute.
Thank you. I shouldn't have turned it off mute, but there you go. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Chana. That was great. I think it read some really sort of key points that sort of come through there, and a good reminder that the use of the expert is broader than sustainability. It applies to audits and reviews as well. And I did like the other point you made really around at the heart of yes, you need to do a good engagement, as Greg said, end to end, a very comprehensive standard that allows that, but people are at the heart of bringing this to life, and what are the ethics and independence considerations when you're thinking about what happens in the real world. So a sort of a crucial and important companion or equally important piece. Chana, I just thought, briefly, if we could just cover off the given your Australian context, it would be really helpful just to give us maybe a quick update, if you could, just on the Australian approach to independence and ethics before we get Darby's take on the New Zealand environment. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. So as Greg mentioned before, Australia adopted 5000 in January of this year. And this was mainly because of the climate legislation that was finalized in Australia in September last year. And so effectively for the largest entities, and we are talking about revenue of 500 million, assets of 1 billion, and employees over 500. So you need to meet 2 out of those 3 criteria. For them, sustainability reporting started from 1st January 2025. So there was a strong push to make the assurance standard available as soon as possible. And this also meant that APSB in Australia had to update the code as the Australian code carries the force of law through the incorporation in the AUSB standard. So we needed to act quickly so that Australian assurance practitioners would have a clear, enforceable ethics and independence framework ready for the very first year of assurance. So to achieve this, we had to work at pace in close coordination with our sustainability task force, as well as the AUSB, to develop our exposure draft, which was issued in March of this year. And then the standards were finalized at the June board meeting. So similar to the New Zealand proposals, Wendy, APSP standards are closely aligned with the global ISI and the expert standards, with only limited amendments needed to reflect Australian specific circumstances. I think it's very similar to your approach. Now, generally, APSP adopts the international effective dates. But in this specific instance, because of the Australian legislation was in front, the APSP determined to adopt 1st January 2026 for the Australian code, and then the late implementation date for the value chain components, which we can get to later.
Yeah.
So we also had to, because of this early adoption compared to the international timeline, we also built in some transitional provisions to provide some relief to practitioners. However, where you use this relief, we have mandated that there should be a disclosure to those charged with governance. From APSP's perspective, it's pleasing to note that Australia became the first jurisdiction globally to adopt ISBA's ISI and expert standards. And this was, as I said before, primarily driven by the legislation in Australia. The sustainability journey is still ongoing. While the standard has been finalized, we are working on guidance documents such as the prohibitions and then audit partner rotation. So these documents will be issued in the next few months, hopefully before the end of the year, which will also assist with adoption and implementation.
Right. Thank you, Chana. That's we're definitely everyone's watching across the Tasman. What's happening there and continuing to evolve, and as the reporting and the assurance regimes sort of kick in. But Darby, thank you for waiting patiently. And over to you. I mean, my main question to you, Darby, you obviously have a huge amount of experience working in the international, but also New Zealand context of big global firm like KPMG. What are you seeing in the market for sustainability assurance in New Zealand? What is the current demand for sustainability assurance?
Kia ora, and thank you, Wendy. So from a assurance point of view, for sustainability assurance in New Zealand, we're really seeing that most are not going beyond the mandatory. There are some, but the majority are following the mandatory in terms of who has to report and get assurance. So we did a deep dive back in May when we pulled together some thought leadership to accompany our transparency report. And that thought leadership was based on trying to get a full picture of who was doing the minimum when it came to disclosures and assurance, and who was doing more and why were those entities that were doing more, what was their rationale. What we found was that in our climate reporting entity client base, so those are the entities that have to report, and they were clients of KPMG. So in that population, about 25% of those were going beyond the minimum and reporting on more than just the mandatory GHG aspect of it. And then if you looked at those that were wider than climate reporting entities, so those, not just those that had to report, but those that chose to report, out of the entire population, again, of just KPMG clients, there were about 30% that were voluntarily reporting on ESG, going beyond. So you still see the vast majority of those that are required by legislation to incorporate things. And there is a quarter to slightly more that are going beyond that, both in terms of reporting and in terms of getting assurance over those. And looking at what standards they've been using to date. So in New Zealand, we've got SAE1, which is the blanket standard that you have to use if you're a climate reporting entity to comply with the New Zealand climate standards. So that was issued as a temporary standard for 5 years to put out to address these New Zealand climate reporting entities. So they're using SAE1. And then for the for the GHG aspect, they're using 3410 in relation to those particular, providing assurance over those particular disclosures. There were some not using 3410, so the XRB did put out a snapshot just last month. We're in October now, and so in September, and it showed that basically 90% of those getting assurance were using 3410 as the standard to get assurance, to provide assurance over GHG, and about 10% were using something else. The majority of those were ISO standards. But as 5,000 is being proposed as another option to use as to provide assurance over that. So just thinking about that, there are challenges and benefits in terms of adding 5,000. So as 5,000 is going to be added on top and being another option, that means there's going to be multiple options that people can use. Some may say that that's a really positive thing, so it caters for everyone. But 5,000 is a lot more prescriptive. It was designed as a wider assurance standard. It was designed, and it follows a similar risk assessment methodology that we do for audits, financial statement audits. So how you assess fraud, how you think about estimates. It's really aligning to ensure that there's consistent thought processes used as you would do for a financial statement audit. Really goes back to Greg's comment earlier in relation to people that want to rely on assurance. They want to make sure that there's a really robust process that sits behind that. So 5,000 caters for that a lot more than the other standards do. So one of the challenges by allowing 3 different standards to be used, or multiple standards to be used in terms of providing assurance, you could have a situation where there is a lesser standard of assurance, but they still can provide an assurance opinion. Now, I'm just saying that that's a possibility. But because 5,000 is much more prescriptive, it really gives the answers that you might have when you're starting to go through assurance, whereas the other standards may be silent on those things. So then the assurance practitioner has the ability to pick and choose which standards they follow and which level of work and thought process that goes in behind it. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't adopt 5,000. I definitely think we should. I'm just saying that when there's multiple options, it does create somewhat of a risk that people could be doing different levels of work to provide the same level of assurance that appears from a user's point of view at the other side. So that's just a risk that has when there's multiples. In terms of benefits, as was said, 5,000 really has a current lens. It's wider and it covers things that the likes of 3410 doesn't. It's specific on those things, whereas 3410 is silent on some things. It certainly is better for New Zealand entities that are working on an international stage. They'll want to be referencing international standards and having their assurance practitioner reference international standards. It is better for practitioners in terms of the clarity provided around what is required for providing assurance, where the other standards are silent. And then for anyone working in a global firm, a global standard will be supported by a global firm in terms of they will determine methodology based on 5,000, and that will be updated as understanding evolves over time. So that's sort of my snapshot in terms of what we're seeing in the market at the moment.
Yeah, no, there's thank you, Darby. There's a bit to sort of people to delve in there, and I would encourage again, if you've got any questions, we've got a little bit more. I'm going to come back to the panel with some more thoughts, but we are very keen to open up for questions, and I think all 3 panelists have provided some interesting and very helpful and very big picture things and big on context and what's happening internationally. And then Darby liked what you said in terms of, well, actually, yes, what are the specifics around the ESO 5000 and clearly some things that the XRB in terms of thinking about the future of the temporary standard. There's a bit of a clue in the word temporary. We will have to make a call at some time. But in the meantime, the proposal is to keep it broad so that we understand, and it's something that we're actively monitoring. Just a general question to you all, which is really just, in the assurance practitioners are always encouraged to stand back and look at this. Is there anything that you think would be really useful to add to the points that we have raised today? I mean, we're particularly thinking of, benefits, issues, aspects of the nature of the information that's being assured and the independence and ethics considerations that have arisen, just in that broad church of looking at these standards, things that you think it would be useful to sort of add that and make our people attending this webinar sort of aware of. Greg, can I go to you first?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. Well, clearly I'm wearing an international hat, so I'm inclined to, I guess, push the international product. But I really do, as part of the board that approved it. And so you mentioned at the start, I came on board at the start of 2023. So that's when the project was developing. It wasn't even an ED at that point. So I guess I've seen it right, pretty much through its journey. I really do think, excuse me, that it is fit for purpose. I think it is a standard that is robust. It's got international recognition for being so from other standard setters and regulators and, a lot of other key players. So I think it's fit for purpose as a standard, but actually the IAASB is going a step further with this one and really putting a lot of effort into implementation support. And Chana may, in terms of the Australian stuff, obviously you'll be drawing from the international material there, but I think that really sets it apart. It's not like the IAASB's just developed something big and thick and good luck, you're on your own. It's not that at all. It's actually, this is complicated. We want to help you, give us your issues. There's like people are able to log queries and those are IAASB staff and a technical group sort of works on the answers to those. So it's rather than a static FAQ sort of process, which I think there's some of those as well, but it's more of a ongoing implementation support, which I think is reasonably unique for, maybe they've done it on some of the big standards on the ISA side, but, I think the board recognises the significance of it in the market and really wants to encourage adoption and implementation. So I think, so all that said, I think it's hard to argue with not wanting it in the toolbox. I would really encourage everyone to think about it as a helpful addition to the toolbox in the New Zealand scene, and then just see what evolves, and when the temporary, as you say, you've got a temporary standard at the moment, it'll be up to XRB to decide when that is no longer temporary or what happens to it. But I think in the meantime, adding to the toolbox has to be a good thing. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you, Greg. And I, at the risk of plugging the XRB sort of strategic document, there were two things that you highlighted there, which was we recently refreshed our statement of intent looking out 5 years and stood back as an organization and thought of what do we see as the future for external reporting here. And for those on the call who may have already seen it, but if you haven't, please do have a read. But two of our strategic priorities are fit for purpose standards and supporting adoption and implementation. And some of the things that you have raised, Greg, we're definitely seeing in the reporting space, and we are locally having to, whether it's the complexity of the world we live in and the nature of the information that's being sought, but continuing to expect that we have done a lot more and we expect to do a lot more, and we're certainly seeing the international bodies do that a bit. So just sort of to add a little bit to what you've said. Shana, what about you? Any thoughts from you in terms of standing back and looking at what we have here and any aspects that you think we haven't quite covered off from an ethics and independence perspective that you think will be useful to highlight?
No, thanks, Wendy, for the question. And I like to endorse what Greg said as well. From the international board's perspective, I think actually, Greg, it's sort of a very different approach this time, where both boards are open to, they recognize that this is a new area. And both boards have set up 2 technical groups where, as Greg said, you can log on to the website and put in if you have any queries. The technical staff will look at it and then they will take it to these technical groups. And then the technical groups will make recommendations, whether it's to the IAASB or ISBA. And I think if there is sort of, narrow scope amendments to be done and it's valid, then I think the boards will take that on. So there's recognition that this is not something we can just pass it on and here you go and do it. That this is, we all need to go on the journey. And as Greg said, there are a lot of FAQs coming out, guidance document, comparison to the new Part 5 versus Part 4A. The proportionality document has been issued, and also ISBA has issued the prohibitions document so that sustainability assurance practitioners don't get caught out. From a domestic perspective, when we issued it, some of the feedback we got was on the complexity of the value chain components and the difficulty in getting the information. So originally, because Australia was adopting the code 1 year early, in the ED, we had put the value chain provisions also being adopted 1 year earlier than global. And we got a lot of feedback on that. And also, the way the climate legislation works, it's not necessarily picking up because it goes by sizes of revenue and assets and employees. Some of these are not necessarily listed entities. So because of that as well, there was some concern whether they would be ready in time. So during our exposure process, APSP technical staff also looked into some of the large listed entities in Australia and Europe. And we noticed that they were voluntarily disclosing Scope 3 information and in some cases doing assurance over these disclosures to demonstrate their ESG credentials, particularly to the market and investors. So ultimately, the board determined that let's keep it the same as the international adoption date, because that would make it easier on the assurance practitioners, because by that date, the whole world needs to be ready to do the value chain reporting. So accordingly, a change was done to the value chain to adopt it from 1st July 2028. I think we also must be mindful the global standards which Darby and Greg spoke about. Also the Trans-Tasman harmonization, given that we have a lot of entities working across both Australia and New Zealand. And from the Australian perspective, now both the assurance and the ethics and independence standards are done. So I think it would be very useful and let's say efficient for some entities if New Zealand follows suit.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Chana, for raising the Trans-Tasman point, which is very much sort of a key sort of plank of how we have for many years worked closely with our Australian colleagues and continue to do so. Darby, I see we've got a couple of questions coming, which is fantastic. But before we go to those, any final thoughts from you? Just as, I mean, you might be called upon in the next section, but giving you the same opportunity about things you might want to highlight.
I think the only thing I really want to highlight is when we did our thought leadership earlier in the year, what we found, the loudest voice we heard, is that while New Zealand's an early mover, many leaders in New Zealand really see harmonization with international standards to being essential to being able to compete internationally. So, for companies and for entities operating globally, the shift towards consistent standards isn't just welcome, it's actually critical. And New Zealand businesses can't afford to operate in isolation. So local reporting has got to be globally relevant, and the 5,000 just really aligns with that. So that's the only point I wanted to make, is that there's a real benefit to being globally aligned for lots of reasons, and particularly the users find that incredibly important.
And thank you, Darby. And I think that to sort of reinforce that point, our strategy is sort of badged as internationally aligned, locally relevant, which for the reasons that you that we sort of recognise. And I think to also on the thing that we started this conversation with Greg talking about the reporting framework, we the XRB recently sort of consulted on international alignment of our climate standards, and key themes emerged from that, and one was very much about international alignment is definitely wanted, but and a part of that is the Trans-Tasman piece in terms of the standards there, but also a sort of a key theme of thinking about some level of stability as we move to what is continuing to be a rapidly evolving and changing space. I might just go to the questions. We have this is fantastic. We've hit our KPI of allowing a bit of time for questions. So the first question I have here is: have you seen any international recommendations to assure nature-related information with ISO 5000?
Asking me, I guess.
Yes, yes. Yes. Thank you, Greg. Yeah.
I think it sort of comes back to the reporting framework. So is it, I'm just trying to understand the question. So, because I know SASB's been thinking about recognition of things like national parks and things like that on balance sheet and stuff. So it becomes part of the financial statements information and therefore the financial audit. But I'm just struggling with the use of the word nature in this context.
Right. I'm not sure if the person who's asked the question might want to elaborate a little bit more. Is it, I guess, looking at the reporting framework, and we obviously have S1 and S2, which is sort of climate, and there is obviously that focus on, well, what might be happening in by way of nature-based disclosures and what the ISSB might be doing. I'm not sure whether that's at the heart of the question here. Yeah, that's right. So it is about the the task force for nature-based disclosures, and as I understand it, the international body is, that is one of the things that they were working through in terms of the decision making on what to do next. I might just check whether Misha or Karen, any others people on the call might have any comments, or any of the other panels. But
To give it a go. I think it's too early to really comment on whether people are using 5000 to assure nature. Actually, no one's really used 5000 yet to assure anything. It's just been developed, it's been issued, it's live in Australia for climate reporting, but it is designed to cater to assuring subjects like nature-based reporting. So I think I would leave it there.
Yeah, thank you. The next question I have is, as a non-financial auditor, any best practices on how we should implement the new ISPA standards? So there we are, very clear person I can point that question to.
Yeah. So I think you have to sort of look at what's in part 5 of the code, and also you can have a look at the guidance document. So if you visit the sustainability page on the ISPA website, there's a whole host of guidance documents that are available. I think you have to also keep in mind, are you doing engagement that is caught by part 5? So not every engagement will be caught by part 5, the independence requirements in part 5. And if you're not caught by part 5, then you are caught by part 4B, and that is in the current code. So part 5 is, you have to be it has to be a general purpose framework. Either it's required by law or regulation, or it's being used for investment decision-making purposes. So it's a higher bar where there is significant public interest in those entities. And that for Group 1 entities in Australia, there's no question that they are being caught by that high bar in Part 5. So if you're not caught by that high bar, then you revert to Part 4B, which is in the current code. So it's not a... So I would sort of caution that be mindful what engagements get caught in Part 5, because a lot of it might continue to be caught by Part 4B. At the September ISBA board meeting, we also kicked off a project to review Part 4B and to see its appropriateness for sustainability assurance. So that's another project that's in the pipeline.
Yes. Thanks very much, Channa. Just check with the team whether we've got any other questions. Doesn't look from what I can see, but
Hi, Wendy. No other questions at present.
okay. Oh, very good. All right. Okay, just a last opportunity for any questions here before we well, we've got 3 minutes to go, so please, but look, if you haven't got anything now, but absolutely please do reach out with any questions that you might have. We are delighted that you have all attended today. It's really great to see the turnout. Hopefully you have found it useful and informative. Reminder that the consultation closes on the 10th of October, 10 days away. So we definitely would like to hear from people about what they think of the proposals, because the decision making by the XRB is best informed by the stakeholder feedback. So please, a big plug for coming back to us and giving us your thoughts and views. We will make the slides and the recording, not 3 slides, already recording, available after the webinar. And we will also send you a survey just to make sure that you tell us what do you think. But lastly, just a big thank you from the XRB to our panelists for taking the time out of their day to come and share their thoughts and perspectives. I think there's some quite rich material there, covering a very strategic context down to some real specifics around how you might need to navigate and think about these standards should the proposals go ahead. So including the work that the international boards are thinking about, understanding that this is a very new and evolving and fast-moving space. So continuing to think about and respond to issues as they arise and think about what might be needed in terms of implementation is going to be key to all of this. So yeah, thank you all, and come along to the next XRB webinar. Bit of a plug.